Millionaire discovers his maid breastfeeding his baby. And what happened next changed everything. The Manhattan townhouse was warm and alive, filled with the soft rhythms of Clare's beloved jazz and the cinnamon scent of her afternoon baking. Clare was nothing like the women of high society Alexander often met through his work. She was an illustrator of children's books with a radiant smile and an imagination without end. On evenings when Alexander returned from grueling meetings, he would often find Clare barefoot before her easel, humming classical tunes while painting enchanted forests for her latest manuscript. Alexander, who lived in the rigid world of numbers and negotiations, felt himself soften each time he stepped into the space Clare created. She brought light, warmth, and a peace no contract could ever purchase. They often sat together in the spacious kitchen, Clare cooking pasta from her family's old recipe, while Alexander chopped vegetables. Amid the bubbling pots and the sound of knives on cutting boards, he would place his hand gently on her rounded belly and ask, "How's our little girl today?" Clare, smiling mischievously, would reply, "Restless just like her dad, but I think tonight she wants to meet you." That was one of the last complete conversations they ever shared. The night of fate came without warning. Clare was seized by excruciating pain and rushed to the hospital. Doctors determined an emergency C-section was the only chance. At 3 a.m, Sophia entered the world. But joy was short-lived. Clare's body, exhausted and overwhelmed by the complications, began to fail. Before leaving this world, she was given her daughter to hold. Tears traced down her pale cheeks as she whispered to the infant, "You will always be loved, no matter where I am." 6 hours later, Alexander was a widower. That moment cleaved his life into two distinct halves. Before Clare, full of laughter and light, and after Clare, a void nothing could fill. The grand Manhattan townhouse quickly became a lavish mausoleum. Clare's paintings still hung on the walls, yet no one stopped to admire them. The piano gathered dust in silence. The wide dining table was still set for many, yet only one chair was ever used. Alexander buried himself in work as if running from his own shadow. But each night when he returned, the silence of the kitchen, the empty chair at the table, and the relentless cries of Sophia reminded him that the world he once knew had shattered forever. The days that followed stretched like an endless chain. Alexander Reed, the man who once negotiated billion-dollar deals, now stood helpless before a fragile being weighing less than 15 pounds. Sophia cried without ceasing. From dawn until the depths of night, her wails tore through the walls of the townhouse. Alexander hired seasoned nurses, New York's finest pediatricians, even infant sleep consultants, yet all failed. "She refuses the bottle," one nurse sighed after countless attempts. "She feels her father's tension," another remarked, watching Alexander hold the baby with stiff, uncertain arms. One specialist even suggested, "Perhaps medication is necessary. Some infants suffer from gastric issues." But Alexander knew that wasn't the root. Deep inside, he sensed the problem was not within the child's body, but in the invisible chasm between them. He had triumphed in every other arena. On Wall Street, they called him the Iron Negotiator. He could close contracts in 3 languages, command thousands of employees. And yet, in the nursery on the second floor of his elegant townhouse, he had no idea how to cradle his daughter without sending her into screams. Sophia resisted every attempt. In his arms, her tiny body arched rigid like a coiled spring. When he offered a bottle, she turned her face away and cried harder. Night after night, Alexander sat helpless by the crib, watching her scream until exhaustion carried her into shallow sleep. The house increasingly resembled a mausoleum. Chandeliers still glowed brightly, yet no one lifted their eyes. The staff moved with hushed steps, as if trapped in an endless funeral. Dinner was served promptly, but Alexander rarely sat to eat. Boxes of expensive toys remained sealed and gathering dust, for every time he tried to play with her, Sophia dissolved into tears. In his desperation to escape, Alexander buried himself in work. He arrived at the office by 7 in the morning, leaving past 10 at night. Weekends found him drowning in financial reports while Sophia was left to whichever caretaker was on shift. He told himself, "It will be easier when she's older." But with every passing day, the distance widened, like a crack spreading silently, impossible to repair. Each cry from Sophia was a reproach. Each smile that never came was a door slammed in his face. And slowly Alexander began to believe perhaps he simply wasn't capable of being a father. While Alexander slowly became a shadow within his own home, a new name entered the scene: Elena Morales. She arrived on a Monday morning in October as maple leaves painted Manhattan's sidewalks red. The household agency sent over her resume. 30 years old, years of experience in affluent homes, reliable references, full-time availability. To Alexander, she was just another name in the endless list of replacements he barely noticed. He hardly lifted his eyes from the computer when the house manager introduced her. As long as the house stayed clean and dinner was served on time, he cared for nothing more. But the resume did not tell the whole truth. 1 year before stepping into the Reed household, Elena had lost her only son, Diego, to a respiratory infection doctors couldn't cure. Diego was 9 months old with soft curls and a smile bright enough to light an entire room. The day he died, part of Elena vanished with him. Since then, her body still woke in the middle of the night, breasts aching with milk no one would drink. Her heart still trembled each time she heard a child crying on the street. The world saw a composed, diligent, discreet woman. But inside, Elena carried a void that nothing could fill. The first time she heard Sophia cry in the townhouse, she froze. That cry was not just the sound of hunger or fatigue, it was a hauntingly familiar echo, like the voice of her own shattered heart returning to life. Elena was no doctor, no specialist, but she knew one truth with piercing clarity. Some children don't need more medicine or stricter routines. They need arms that know how to listen. She began her work quietly, scrubbing floors, cooking meals, tidying rooms, keeping the proper distance expected of hired staff. Yet every time she passed the nursery where Sophia wailed, her steps faltered. She hadn't acted yet, but in her eyes there was already a recognition, one Alexander never saw. Fate had just placed her there, waiting for the day when the cold walls of that house would finally begin to crumble. From the very first days, Elena realized that Sophia's cries were unlike any other child's. They weren't merely signs of hunger or fatigue. They were hoarse, prolonged wails, filled with despair, as if the infant were pleading for an embrace that truly understood her pain. And each time, Elena's heart ached, pulling her back to memories of Diego, the son she had lost too soon. She couldn't resist. At first, Elena only whispered softly as she passed the nursery. "Hush now, sweet little one." Strangely, Sophia listened. For a few fleeting seconds, the cries subsided. Her wide blue eyes opened, searching for that unfamiliar yet soothing voice. From then on, Elena began to sing lullabies. The same melodies she once sang to Diego, tender Spanish tunes, simple verses soaked in love. She stood at the doorway, never entering, never holding the baby, just letting her voice spill into the cold, empty space. The effect was remarkable. Sophia began to change. Her cries no longer stretched endlessly. Her fits grew shorter, less fierce. At times she even drifted into brief naps, her breathing soft and steady, as though she had found fragments of peace in that familiar sound. Then one evening, everything shifted. The nurse on duty had stepped out to buy medicine. The house was hushed, save for the relentless sobs echoing down from the second floor. Elena hesitated at the bottom of the stairs, her heart pounding with urgency. Finally, she climbed. Sophia lay in her crib, face flushed crimson, her tiny body trembling from hours of crying. Elena approached, her hand trembling as she extended a finger. At once the infant's small fist closed tightly around it. The unexpected strength of that fragile grip brought tears to Elena's eyes. She lifted Sophia into her arms for the very first time since entering the Reed household. The baby squirmed for a moment, then pressed her face against Elena's shoulder, still sobbing. But as their skin touched, Elena felt something astonishing, milk flowing within her, responding instinctively to the infant's desperate cries. Tears welled as she whispered, "My little one, Mama's here now." Against every rule, every boundary, Elena unbuttoned her blouse and nursed Sophia. In that instant, silence descended. For the first time in months, Sophia stopped crying. The frantic breath slowed into steady rhythm. Her tiny body softened. Her eyes fluttered shut, surrendering to peaceful sleep in the arms of a woman once a stranger, but carrying the deepest maternal instinct. That was the night of destiny, the night a bond was born, a connection that nothing could ever sever. That fragile peace did not last. One evening, after a long business trip, Alexander returned earlier than usual. He gave no warning, expecting nothing but the familiar silence. But as he stepped into the kitchen, the sight before him struck his heart like a blade. Beneath the dim amber light, Elena sat on a wooden chair, holding Sophia in her arms. The infant nursed calmly, her tiny hands resting on Elena's chest, her breathing steady. Alexander's leather briefcase crashed onto the stone floor with a hollow thud. He froze, eyes wide. In that instant, the rules he had lived by all his life began to crumble. "What are you doing with my daughter?" His voice cracked, angry, bewildered. Elena looked up. In her deep brown eyes, there was no defiance, no fear, only a quiet certainty, as if she knew she was doing the one right thing. Alexander turned away, saying nothing more, but that image burned into him like fire. All night he paced the silent halls, torn between fury and awe. His mind screamed that this was an unforgivable violation, but every time he closed his eyes, he saw Sophia's peaceful face, and his heart trembled with a longing he could not silence. The next day, he sought out Dr. Victoria Hale, Clare's old friend and a renowned child psychologist. In her office, lined with books and framed diplomas, Alexander recounted what he had seen. Victoria listened in silence, then closed her leather-bound notebook. Her eyes were sharp as blades. "Alexander, this is entirely inappropriate. A housekeeper has no right to do such a thing. She is creating an emotional dependency that is unhealthy. Worse, your daughter will confuse maternal roles. This could cause lasting harm." He tried to defend, but Sophia slept peacefully. She has never been like that before. "That is precisely the problem," Victoria cut in coldly. "The child is being misled. This is not healing. It is unconscious manipulation. You must end it now. Otherwise, the consequences will be severe." Her words fell like a sentence. That night, Alexander summoned Elena to his study. Her face was calm, though her hands trembled. She knew this moment would come sooner or later. "Elena," Alexander said, his voice hoarse, "I cannot accept what you've done. Tomorrow, pack your things and leave. I will pay you in full." The words struck like a knife. Elena pressed her lips together, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. She whispered only one request. "Please, may I hold Sophia one last time?" "No?" The reply cracked out like a whip. That night, Sophia screamed until exhaustion overcame her, while Alexander sat alone in his study, consumed by the sense that he had just lost something precious he did not yet understand. The moment Elena left, the house descended into chaos. Sophia relapsed almost instantly. She cried without pause, day and night. Her hoarse, endless wails seemed to rip through the walls, and no one could console her. She refused the bottle, lost weight rapidly, and her once bright blue eyes now looked hollow and dim. Sleep abandoned her too. Every time she drifted off, she startled awake, sobbing as if mourning something irreplaceable. Alexander was exhausted. He barely slept, sitting helpless by the crib, cradling his daughter, yet unable to soothe her despair. Each night, the townhouse echoed with her cries, an endless accusation that he had been wrong. In his most broken hours, Alexander began to doubt his decision. He remembered Elena's steady gaze, the moment Sophia first slept peacefully in her arms. His mind had insisted it was a mistake, a violation of boundaries. But his heart bled as he watched his child grow thinner, weaker. One late night, when Sophia cried until her voice grew raw, Alexander left the nursery and wandered into the bedroom he had once shared with Clare. The room remained untouched since her passing, framed photographs, a small piano, and in the corner of the wardrobe, a wooden box carefully sealed. He had seen the box many times, but had never dared open it. On its lid, in Clare's handwriting, were the words, "For Alexander." With trembling hands resting on the wood, Alexander understood that perhaps the time had come. Alexander's hands trembled as he opened the wooden box. Inside lay small mementos, a few ultrasound photos of Sophia, Clare's sketchbook filled with illustrations for children's stories, a lock of hair tied with a pale blue ribbon, and at the bottom, an ivory envelope bearing the words, "For Alexander, when I am no longer with you." His hands shook as he tore open the seal. The familiar slant of Clare's handwriting appeared, soft and flowing, as though her voice still lingered in the room. "Alexander, my love, if you are reading this, it means the worst has happened. It means I could not stay to raise our daughter with you, and I know right now you feel lost, afraid, even angry at yourself. But please don't let that fear consume your heart." Alexander collapsed into a chair, his vision blurred. Clare had foreseen the very reality he now lived. She continued, "There is someone I want you to know. Her name is Elena Morales. I met her during one of my prenatal checkups at the hospital. She sat in the waiting room with a little boy named Diego, fighting pneumonia. We spoke. Elena told me about her life as a single mother, about sleepless nights of worry, about how she learned to listen to each breath of her child, to understand his needs. I had never met a woman so strong, though her eyes still carried constant fear." Alexander's throat tightened. He recalled Elena's deep brown eyes, the way she had held Sophia for the first time, not awkward, not hesitant, but with absolute certainty, like instinct. Clare's words pressed on. "A week later, Diego passed away. I was there. I saw Elena cradle her son one final time, whispering lullabies through trembling lips. Alexander, you cannot imagine the strength of a mother's love until you witness such a moment. I knew then, Elena was someone I could trust completely." The ink blurred under Alexander's tears. His chest heaved, breath ragged. "If something happens to me during childbirth, please seek out Elena. Give her the chance to love Sophia in the way I no longer can. Elena understands loss. She knows what true motherhood means, not bound by paper or blood, but by the heart. Alexander, I know you will be a good father, but I also know you will be afraid. And when fear keeps you from reaching Sophia, Elena will be the bridge." Alexander folded the letter, burying his head in his hands. The truth crashed over him. Clare had known. Clare had chosen Elena long before as her final gift to safeguard their child. His tears spilled onto the paper, mingling with her familiar script. For the first time in months, Alexander wept like a child, uncontrollably, inconsolably. He realized he had made a terrible mistake. He had cast away the one woman Clare trusted, the only one who had ever brought peace to Sophia. In the darkness, he whispered as though Clare could still hear him, I was wrong, Clare. I was so wrong." After finishing Clare's letter, Alexander sat motionless for a long time. A powerful urge rose within him. He had to find Elena. Not in Manhattan, not as a name on the Reed household staff, but in the place she truly belonged. He began searching. The sparse information in her file revealed only that Elena was born in a small seaside town, a few hours' drive from the city. One winter morning, Alexander left Sophia with the trusted housekeeper and set out. The car rolled past New York's bustling avenues, then slowly entered the quiet countryside. The skyscrapers faded, replaced by misty fields and humble wooden homes. He felt as if he were leaving behind the cold, lifeless world he knew, journeying instead toward memory and heart. Elena's hometown was small, its cobbled streets opening onto the endless blue horizon of the sea. People knew one another by name, greeting with warm smiles. When Alexander asked about Elena Morales, their eyes flickered with sympathy. An elderly woman guided him to a small white cottage by the shore. Its windows stood ajar, the wind carrying the scent of salt and the murmur of waves. Alexander drew a deep breath and knocked. Elena appeared, no longer wearing the Reed uniform, no longer bearing the guarded air of a servant. She wore a simple wool dress, her hair tied back, her face touched with both weariness and calm. When she saw Alexander, her eyes widened, astonished, wary. "What are you doing here?" Her voice was hoarse. Alexander faltered. Countless words churned in his mind, yet only one sentence escaped. "I read Clare's letter." Elena froze. In that instant, the defenses in her gaze dissolved. Tears welled up, for she knew Clare had entrusted Alexander with what she herself had never dared to say. Alexander stepped forward, his voice trembling. "Clare chose you long ago, and I was wrong to send you away. Sophia needs you. I need you. Please, come back to us." Elena lowered her head, her hands clutching the hem of her dress. Memories of Diego flooded back, along with the fear of society's judgment. But then she recalled the fragile smile of Sophia, sleeping peacefully in her arms. At last, she lifted her gaze. Her voice shook, but it was steady. "Only if you truly believe I am not a replacement, but a partner." Alexander nodded, eyes burning with tears. "Not a replacement. You are Clare's final gift, and the family I want to rebuild." Outside, the waves kept breaking against the shore. But within the small cottage, a door opened, a door leading them back to one another, not only for Sophia, but for the love Clare had woven long before. Elena returned to Alexander's home not as an invisible servant, but as someone who truly belonged. She resumed caring for Sophia, but this time Alexander no longer watched from a distance. He sat beside her, learning each small gesture: how to hold the baby without making her cry, how to prepare a bottle just right, how to hum a lullaby into peaceful sleep. At first he was clumsy, but Elena guided him with patience. Slowly, Alexander learned, and with each passing day, he felt himself becoming a father in the truest sense. One afternoon, as he sat on the rug playing with Sophia, she suddenly babbled her first words. "Ba, ba." Alexander froze. The world seemed to stop spinning. He turned toward Elena, eyes brimming, then pulled his daughter into his arms. Tears burst forth, not of sorrow, but of pure joy. Sophia had called him Daddy. Months later, Sophia took her first steps. Her unsteady little feet carried her straight into Alexander's arms. He clutched her tightly, overwhelmed by the fragile miracle of the moment. Elena stood nearby, hands covering her mouth to hide the tears streaming down. In that instant, the three of them felt like a true family. Love for Elena grew inside Alexander. He began to see her tenderness not only toward Sophia, but toward himself, the man who had once buried his heart in work and solitude. He longed to move forward, yet every time his eyes lingered on Clare's photo on the shelf, his chest tightened. Would loving Elena mean betraying Clare? The question haunted him night after night. Slowly he withdrew, turning quiet, distant. Elena noticed, but she stayed silent, knowing he still carried a shadow he hadn't yet crossed. One day Alexander's mother visited. She looked at her son and saw the torment in his eyes. As they sat together on the porch, Alexander confessed, "I'm afraid if I love Elena, it means I've betrayed Clare." She smiled softly, taking his hand. "Clare didn't leave so you would live in darkness, Alexander. She wanted you to be happy. She wanted Sophia to have a mother's love. Elena is not a replacement. She is a continuation. Believe me, Clare would want this too." Those words unlocked something deep within him. That night, under a sky scattered with stars, Alexander sat with Elena in the garden. He spoke everything, his fear, his guilt, his love, and his longing to move forward. "I don't know if I deserve this," he whispered, "but I want you here, not only as Sophia's caregiver, but as my partner in all things." Elena stayed quiet for a few moments, her eyes glistening. Then she nodded softly and said, "I've been here all along, just waiting for you to see me." Alexander leaned in. When their lips met, the night sky seemed to blaze. It was no longer the kiss of two lonely souls, but a promise that after grief and loss, they had found each other ready to begin a new chapter, for themselves and for Sophia. One evening, after Sophia had drifted to sleep, Alexander turned to Elena and said unexpectedly, "I want to take you and Sophia to your hometown. I want to see the place that raised a woman as extraordinary as you." Elena froze. In his eyes there was no hesitation, only sincerity. After a few seconds of silence, she nodded, a quiet smile spreading across her lips. A few days later, they set off. The car rolled past coastal roads, fields of green, until it stopped before a small white house nestled by the waves. Elena's parents were waiting. Her mother embraced her tightly, while her father's eyes lit with joy as he saw Alexander holding Sophia. "Such a beautiful child," he said, voice trembling, eyes as bright as an angel's. Shatters. At their first family dinner, Alexander listened to stories of Elena's childhood, her days running along the beach, the scrapes and falls she laughed through, the dreams she once carried. Her parents looked at him with a trust that warmed him, as though they already saw a complete family forming before them. Sophia, usually shy around strangers, quickly clung to her new grandparents, laughing freely in their arms. For a whole week, they lived like a true family. In the mornings, Alexander walked Sophia along the shore, while Elena prepared simple breakfasts of coffee and toast. At midday, they played on the sand together, building castles for Sophia, laughing when the tide swept them away. In the evenings, they sat side by side, watching sunsets paint the horizon crimson, Sophia holding both their hands as though she wanted to keep the moment forever. Alexander had never felt such peace. No contracts, no financial reports, no lonely nights in a cold house. Only the sea, the wind, the sun, the sound of a child's laughter, and a love growing steadily inside him. On Friday evening, the sunset burned brighter than ever. The sun sank slowly into the ocean, painting the sky in hues of fire and gold. Elena held Sophia in her arms, while Alexander stood nearby, his eyes fixed on the two of them. His heart pounded. He knew this was the moment he had been waiting for. He drew a deep breath, then suddenly dropped to one knee in the sand. Elena's eyes widened, stunned. Sophia, equally startled, patted her mother's cheeks with tiny hands. "Elena," Alexander began, voice trembling but resolute, "I've lost so much in life, but meeting you showed me that God still gave me a second chance. You didn't just save Sophia, you saved me too. I want you by my side, not just today, not just tomorrow, but for the rest of my life. Will you marry me?" Elena stood frozen, eyes brimming with tears. For years she had carried loss like armor, shielding herself from hope. Yet now, in Alexander's trembling voice, the armor cracked, and within it she saw the clear vision of a future filled with hope. Sophia chirped, "Mama," as though urging her to answer. Elena nodded. "Yes, I will." Tears spilled down Alexander's face as he pulled both her and Sophia into his arms. Waves crashed on the shore, the wind whispered through the dunes, and the last rays of the sun disappeared beyond the horizon. On that windswept beach, a new family was born. Their wedding took place in the little garden behind the house, where golden sunlight streamed through the trees and the wind stirred the blossoms. No noise, no grandeur, only close friends, family, and an atmosphere as warm as a spring embrace. Sophia, in a tiny white suit, toddled down the flower-strewn path, her laughter ringing like music. The guests chuckled along, and Alexander's heart swelled with pride. Then Elena appeared. She wore no crown, no extravagant gown, just a simple, pure white dress. Yet it was that simplicity that made her shine brighter than anyone. Alexander held his breath, feeling as though every sorrowful fragment of the past had dissolved, leaving only this moment, the woman he loved walking toward him. When he took her hand, Alexander looked deep into her eyes and spoke his vow. "I promise to love and protect you and our children. You will never have to carry the weight of the world alone again." Tears slipped down Elena's cheeks. In that instant, she knew every loss, every night of despair had led her here, to be loved, to belong, to be called family. After the wedding, Alexander's once cold house transformed completely. No more solitary meals, no more silent halls. Instead, it brimmed with laughter, the aroma of warm meals, and the patter of little feet across the wooden floors. Each morning, Alexander woke to Sophia's cheerful call. "Daddy, wake up!" and Elena's soft laughter from the kitchen. Each evening, the family gathered around the table, sharing stories, singing lullabies, and reading bedtime tales together. Time passed gently. 2 years later, Sophia became a proud big sister when Amelia was born. Holding Amelia in his arms for the first time, Alexander could only gaze at Elena, his eyes shimmering with tears. "We are no longer broken pieces," he whispered, voice choked with emotion. "We are a family." Elena smiled, her eyes glowing with love. Beside them, Sophia proudly declared, "I'm a sister now," a simple phrase that made every heart overflow. The house now brimmed with light and laughter, in every tiny step, every tight embrace, every whispered promise. Alexander and Elena proved one eternal truth. Even after ruin, love can rebuild everything. No painful past could bind them anymore. Now they lived not just to survive, but to love. Outside, the sunset cast its golden glow across the windows. Inside, a family sat together, eyes shining with joy. And in that moment, Alexander understood. Their journey had only just begun, and love, once broken, had found its way home again.